everyone. Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about anger. I think anger is a really fascinating topic because it's often an emotion that we are ashamed of. It's an emotion we might try to suppress because the consequences of it can be pretty bad. It can be dangerous. But it's an important emotion, and it's important to listen to it just like any other emotion. And so today we're going to talk about different sources of anger. Sometimes it can be really surprising, actually, what kind of personality types can kind of be more prone to anger. How really kind of good intentions can lead to anger. We'll talk about some of the consequences of it, how to manage it, how to listen to it, and also, as always, my co-host Kibby is here, and she's going to talk about some personal experiences she's been having that have her pretty angry. So, hi, Kibby.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, this is the day that I'm going to be vulnerable. God. All right. Apologize in advance. But I think a lot of people might be able to relate to what I'm experiencing, so I'm happy to share.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being willing to share. I know I would be very angry in your shoes, so...
Look at that validation. Look at that.
Look at that. So we could say, people usually seek anger management when they realize that their anger is kind of bursting out in ways that are ineffective. They're actually not getting them what they want from that anger. Or that their anger is getting in the way of their life. So maybe their relationships are damaged. Their work might be damaged. So... anger management is very important. Clinically, you see kind of these two different categories of people. There's the externalizers, so people who express themselves through anger a lot. They're kind of used to being more kind of outward in their expression. And then there's the internalizers. So these are people who are actually much more inhibited, shy, withholding. And then, what they'll often do is kind of suppress their anger. And then all of a sudden it will kind of explode out, or they'll just have a lot of shame around their anger and feel as though they can't express it. And so even when they kind of experience anger, they think of it as a problem that they're not allowed to experience. And suppression, we know, is not often the best strategy. Like, Kimmy, what would you say is the purpose of anger?
Yeah, well, that's a super good question, just because I think with any emotion, we talk about this in therapy, that any emotion has their function. There's a reason why we have any emotion, right? And anger is one that people get really uneasy about and have a really difficult relationship with it. But there's a reason why people get angry. At least in DBT, we talk about how anger is a protective emotion, mm-hmm. right? It helps rile us up, right? It gets us ready, it's in the fight, flight, or freeze responses, the fight is there in response to threat, in response to something scary. So it protects us when we're hurt. It protects us when we feel like something's unfair, mm-hmm. or that we're blocked for an important goal and that we need to kind of get hyped up and push forward in order to get what we need. So there's a lot of reasons why anger, it's a very mobilizing emotion, right? So, especially in our society, its anger expression is really tricky, right? It doesn't have a place, and if someone's seen as an angry person, this brings a lot of shame, that brings a lot of judgment, but we can't forget that is really, really important. Protecting ourselves is important, so.
Yeah, it's interestingly, it's an emotion that can feel good in the moment. It can feel really clarifying. Like everything is just really kind of clear. It's not that kind of confusing, ruminative, maybe resentment can be, but I think the sort of outward expressions of anger can feel like, okay, I know what my goal is, or I feel like I know what my goal mm-hmm. is. And it gets people to listen. Like, I think that's one of anger's most important qualities is that, when someone's angry at you, you pay attention. Mm-hmm. And so it can really be, that's in part why it can be mobilizing and why it can be important is your intentions, your motivations, your needs are finally like the other person is perking up and really alert to them.
Yeah, and it's a very, I like how you said that there's that kind of clarity or, you have like this justification, this moment, because I think it feels like a very quick emotion, right? When you're angry, it builds on itself super fast, right? All the other things that you've ever been angry about come really quickly to the surface, and then it's a very sharp, instantaneous emotion. So it can feel good sometimes, but then a lot of people have to deal with the consequences after. So it's tricky to manage, but it's an important tool that once we learn to harness it, it can be really important in your life.
Yeah, so I suppose the quandary is like, anger is important, and we need to listen to the anger, but then how to effectively express it. Or are there times when we should just let loose and just do what the anger is telling us to do? Or is it always an emotion that we kind of have to wrangle and muzzle?
Yeah, I mean, we like to think about anger as it's often what's called a secondary emotion. So primary emotions are emotions that happen first, and then like a reaction to a situation, and then a secondary emotion is like an emotion about the emotion, right? So when people often feel hurt, they feel victimized, they feel attacked, they feel afraid, right? Those more vulnerable emotions. We want to protect ourselves, so very quickly we might turn to anger. So actually that might be what a lot of other people see, and then what might happen in the context of relationships, that you might just see the anger. But to really understand it, you might want to know, like, when the anger is there, you can ask yourself, like, what are you protecting yourself from? What do I feel like I need do I feel vulnerable? What is the first thing I felt? What is my response to this situation that's making me angry? And why do I feel like I need to protect myself? So sometimes I ask myself that question when I feel super angry. So
you use anger as a clue in to what's beneath it.
Yeah, to understand what the function is, which is protection, and then, trying to understand what I'm protecting from, like how do I feel vulnerable? What's going on here? And all emotions are clue-ins to like what's happening. So don't throw the baby out of the bathwater to feel angry and to just feel ashamed about it. Like, oh God, here I am being angry again. You're kind of missing out on what the signal is giving you, which is like, I felt like I need to protect myself from something. But what is that thing?
Yeah. That clarity that we feel with anger, do you think that's actually clarity, or is that just sort of an addictive feeling, and it's maybe disguising the vulnerability underneath, or the truth underneath?
Yeah, I think when you think of emotions as, I always like thinking about it like emotion, right? That's in the word motion is there, and it's like the understanding that emotions make us move in our environment to fulfill our needs, right? And if we need to protect ourselves, we got to do it fast, right? If we feel attacked, we feel under threat, we feel hurt, really quickly we got to, get our armor and get fighting here. And that's just kind of the way that anger works. So it's working, like the signal is going when it's super fast, but it might do that by reminding you of all the different things that you might be angry about. So you might feel it very sharply and act on it very sharply. However, that makes sense when we're cavemen and that we're actually being attacked by a bear. But when we're trying to navigate a really complex relationship or interpersonal interaction, especially in a culture like ours that really doesn't value like just screaming at someone in a workplace or in home life, it's a trick of having to use that protective response and doing it effectively and actually getting what you need out of the situation.
So, Kibby, just tell us what's going on with you right now.
Yeah. Without going into super specifics, I'm going through a breakup with my romantic partner. We're recording this on Valentine's Day, so I feel extra great today. Yeah. Feeling anger every time I see a photo of some, a couple of roses. It's just been... So this is a really salient topic for me today. But
sorry.
It's all right. It's, it's for the best because... actually, this is a situation that acting on anger and respecting and understanding my anger is more effective in the long run. It's going to lead to like longer term happiness than what I was feeling before. So, my example of anger is a really good one for, I think, like resentment and what resentment can do. I don't know. I'm the kind of person who vacillates back and forth between being self-sacrificing. So I like hiding some anger and then having it explode outwardly.
Yeah.
So I really go back and forth. And that's a really common thing I see with people in therapy, where they might suppress, hold back their anger, kind of give into the moment, do whatever the other person wants, and then at some point they lash out or explode. And my understanding of like why I did that and when other people do that is because, so in my example, it's a situation where when my partner and I, we have an agreement on, like distribution of responsibilities, right? Like you do this, I do that, for our relationship. This is my contribution, this is yours. And that when I would see that would be violated, like when I see that he wouldn't do what we agreed on, it would be really hard because I would feel that anger in the moment. Like I'd just be like what the F? Like that the feeling of unfairness, right, would come up. And what I was trying to protect myself from was like feeling like I was being taken advantage of, right? Like extending my limits, doing what I need to do, or even to kind of compensate by doing some of what he wasn't doing that he said he would. And so that's where resentment comes up, where we constantly overextend our limits and don't feel like we get the same back. And in the moment that I would suppress my anger, I did it for the short-term gain of like not really wanting to create too many ruffles in the relationship, or not want to hurt his feelings, or not want to do something that's just not going to help at all. So I did like a short-term solution of maybe mentioning it gently, but not really expressing or acting on the anger, or even validating my own experience of like, yeah, this is unfair, right? So that would happen over and over and over again on a daily basis. And then once in a while, I would get the anger would build up, that I get so angry that I would just yell or scream or get into an argument that sucked, because ultimately I would feel bad for how intense that was, and I'd feel guilty, and it wouldn't even help, right? It wouldn't even actually, it would lead a little bit to some change, like he would kind of do some stuff, but I'm sure a lot of people can kind of relate to this when they really, really act on anger. Actually, they have to apologize for it, right? It becomes more about that anger expression, about how unreasonable or awful that seemed, instead of the initial problem in the first place. So it was ineffective that way. I would yell, and it would be all about how angry I got in that moment versus the problem that originally led to that moment. So,
and then it just compounds, because if there is an injustice, to have to apologize for for pointing out that injustice. And not that I think it's unreasonable, like that it's bad to apologize for an anger outburst, because that is necessary a lot of the time. But if I'm imagining myself in that situation, and it's like, I've been suppressing this for so long, I've been putting up with it, I haven't said anything, I've been trying to be a good partner and be understanding and empathic, and then now I just can't control it anymore. Like I'm just gonna, oh my God, I'm so sorry, how could I do that? Then I'm just gonna get even more angry, because this injustice is still there, nothing is changing, and I was, I had to now muzzle myself for trying to finally express my needs.
Yeah, that was super good validation too, because that's exactly like the kind of arc and the loop that I would go into in myself, where it would build up, I would explode, and then would have to overcorrect by pulling it back and even trying not to express it even in a healthy way. So it really did kind of reflect this flipping back and forth to total self-sacrificing, hiding, suppressing anger to the point where you're like people-pleasing, then swinging all the way to the other side, which is like full explosion of anger. So those two like opposite ends of how to express anger, either not at all or too much.
Yeah.
And many people, we see that, I have a lot of patients who kind of go back and forth between the two, and they get afraid of anger. They're like, help me stop being angry. Right. And that's counterproductive, because it's like, well, if most people think of anger as just that expression of anger, that's really ineffective, that explosion.
Yeah.
Without seeing that there actually is a lot of mid-ground in between the no expression and explosion. There's a lot of this healthy assertiveness, healthy self-protection, setting boundaries, expressing anger and frustration and resentment in a way that is effective and actually can lead to you, either making the situation more fair or protecting yourself appropriately. So
yeah. I will say that's the number one thing I've seen clinically as well with regards to anger and actually other emotions. People feeling like they don't deserve to feel stress, anxiety, anger, whatever, because their conception of that emotion is the consequences of that emotion. And because they don't feel as though they should feel that emotion in the first place, they're like ashamed of it, then they don't listen to it. But the emotion doesn't go away, like just because you tell yourself you're not stressed or you're not scared, doesn't mean you're not. And then it comes out in really ineffective ways, and then that becomes a loop. Like, no, I'm not allowed to feel this way because when I feel this way, I act this way.
Right.
And the other thing I keep seeing is like the people who are angry are the people with the best intentions in some ways. They're like, I want to make sure that my partner or that everyone in my life is taken care of. I need to put their needs before mine all the time. I'm not even going to ask them if they need me in this moment. I'm not even going to ask them if I can take time for myself or space for myself or attend to my own needs, because obviously they need me. Obviously it's better for me to pour my energy into them than into myself. And then that's an untenable situation. It's like your needs then are not being met. You're not getting the space that you need, the care you need, whatever. And so that can boil out into anger. If you're always going along with other people's plans, if you're always attending to other people's needs, then, at a certain point that's going to come out and that's going to have consequences.
It was so funny because I was, teaching this in DBT and just like living it myself that, yeah, sure, that, hiding that emotion or just denying it will calm the waters down in the short term. But in the long term, it drives a wedge, right? It's that resentment builds up. That resentment creates distance between you and that other person. And you can kind of feel that over time. And eventually it just led to what's happening now, which is like this feeling of, that it was just so unfair for so long that I feel like I can't even come back from it. So... now I'm like, okay, fine. I maybe I should have like validated and listened to my anger instead of just right away going to shame.
Yeah.
And then also with so that's like, this is what it looks like when you kind of lean towards the self-sacrificing, like suppression. But for the people who I've seen, and I've actually been this in parts of my life where some people are quick to anger, right? They express things in a really like spicy way where they they shout more often, or they're more angry. And a lot of that is, it's the same thing. It's the same thing of self-protection. And sometimes when I see those people with my patients, I try to think to myself like, wow, they must have had to protect themselves a lot for a while, right? Like a lot of them come from abusive backgrounds where they're, from abusive families, and they've learned to protect themselves and cope with those situations with anger. Yeah. And, I've talked to therapists about this, and people with trauma backgrounds, when they don't fight back and they, kind of submit and go along with it, try to keep quiet, they have some of the issues of like depression, of, wanting to self-harm or even suicidality. But then the people who learn to deal with those traumatic backgrounds with fighting, right? Like getting angry, running away, yelling. Sure, they have other issues, right? They start to carry that in their current life, but they're a little bit less, they don't take it in on themselves as much, which are pros and cons. But, when someone's really angry, you think to yourself, like, what are they protecting themselves from?
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking this even talking about like what I've seen clinically, and then your case, like I do think you're a self-sacrificing person, and then that contributes, but sometimes people do take from you, they do put you in a situation that's bad, or where you need to sacrifice for them, or where, they are abusing you. And, I think that you were a little bit in the second bucket too. Like you were in a bad position, and that anger was justified. It's not just something of your own making. Like it is very legitimate when you are in a situation where people are impinging on your needs and on your freedom and your resources, or your body, that you should feel angry. Yeah.
And it gets to the point, especially if you feel shame about the anger, which I have throughout this relationship and my life, and where you question question the anger. You know, I'm like, oh, maybe I'm being crazy. Maybe I'm being I'm asking for too much, or I'm being unreasonable, right? And then I feel more the guilt and shame in that moment, and that really gets rid of the anger. But that anger doesn't go away. I still, you know, it over time, it had its long-term consequence of me. I started to feel bad about myself. I started to resent my partner. It started to get to me in ways that I didn't see.
Well, and that's the other thing is that, you know, I mean, guilt might kind of kill the anger, but shame often exacerbates it. I mean, one of the biggest consequences of shame is anger, because we don't like looking at ourselves. It's a horrible experience. We don't like looking at ourselves that negatively. Like, shame is such an ugly feeling that we often externalize it. And we're like, no, you made me feel this way, or the situation made me feel this way, not me. And so I'm going to be mad at that. So, you know, if you're feeling a lot of shame about anger, that might be kind of a nasty loop.
Actually, do you want to talk about your experience with anger after The Bachelor, or you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I really was angry for years after The Bachelor.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really really confusing anger. I didn't know what to do with it, and it was an incredibly invalidating experience, because it's a little bit of like poor little rich girl anger. Like, people don't want to hear about, you know, how you wish you got more from an amazing experience that they didn't get to have in the first place. You know, I mean, basically my anger was like feeling like I had to forfeit this incredible once-in-a-lifetime experience, and then being written out of the entire script, having the relationship enormously downplayed, and then, you know, then coming back to work and feeling like there was no reason I had to leave in the first place. Like, everything was fine. And I basically sat around doing nothing for 2 weeks when I could have been on the show. And it was just like, you know, and the problem is like, I love talking about this because I think it's important, and I don't mind talking about my ego, but it in a way it was like an egoistic anger. Like, how could they, like, why wasn't I good enough that I got, you know, written out of the show? Like I knew I wasn't the kind of woman, or I kind of like went back into high school mode of like, of course I'm not the popular girl. Of course I'm not the one that people want to follow and listen to. And of course this would happen. And then, you know, watching people form friendships because they get to go on media tours together. And it's just so much envy. And then, you know, the anger coming from like, you know, people don't understand this. They don't want to understand it. They tell me that I'm just a lot of like, you know, trying to kind of make value statements. Like, you're so much better than that anyway. Like, you know, look at your career. I don't understand why you're still angry about this. Just let it go. You know, a lot of that kind of thing, where it's like, yeah, I wish that I had that valued stance towards it too, but I don't. Like, I wish that I could say, I'm better off, I'm better than this, I'm better than envy, but I'm not better than envy. I'm not better than wishing that I could have the same things that the other people had. And I'm certainly not better than getting upset when people are trashing my name and spreading rumors about me and sending explicit photos of me that they hacked from my email to my boyfriend, and making up rumors about me, you know, that are literally trying to ruin my life. Like, that's all things I feel pretty justified in my anger about. But feeling unjustified in anger was really awful.
Yeah, and for you, that actually sounds like a mixture of two different reasons why there was anger. There's one, the self-protection of feeling hurt, right? Like feeling like, you know, feeling written out, overlooked, and also trashed online. And like,
yeah.
You know, I've seen some of the things that people wrote about you that you were hurt about. I was like, oh, it's rough. It's definitely like, oh no, poor famous person. It's like, oh God, if someone said those things about me, I would feel like really, really hurt, especially by strangers.
Yeah.
But then also like blocked from a goal, right? They're like, here you go, here could, you know, you could have love, you could have all this like adoration, like love in so many different ways, and then nope, you're back to your office life, and it was a dream.
Exactly. Yeah. It is hard when you're given a once in a lifetime opportunity and you have to give it up, and you're just hoping you're hoping that you did enough in the time that you had to make it matter. And then everyone is telling you, you have to make the most out of this. You have to brand yourself. You have to, oh, you want to get a PhD, then you're the smart girl. So do smart girl branding. And then everyone hates that branding. And then you feel chronically misunderstood. And feeling chronically misunderstood is really awful. That's like kind of a hell of its own. Memory works in interesting ways. They started remembering things incorrectly and attributing them to me. So that was just like, you just start losing control of your own, of your own reputation, of how you're perceived by others. And then once the rumors start, then it's like, holy shit, I can't control my future. I can't. Not that we ever have much control over our future, but that's sort of the point of free will and willpower. So yeah, and then all of these things happening, and everyone's just telling you like it shouldn't matter, and you're better than this, and why are you upset in the first place? Why aren't you grateful? I think that's the thing. Why aren't you grateful? How can you be angry?
Validation. Yeah.
So I got very mad at people, and I'm still mad at people, the way they talk to each other online, the quick judgments that they make, we feel that we can be so contemptuous and judgmental towards other people based off of nothing, that we can't give people the benefit of the doubt. Like I'm still angry, just far less so than I was those 2 years.
Yeah, and it's like that is a particular type of threat and attack that a lot of people might not have experience in their life, which is like this onslaught of judgments and perceptions and attacks onto you that people feel free to do because you're a public figure, and then there's not much you can do to protect yourself, right? Like you don't know who these people are. It's like trolls online. It's people who have maybe power over you in some ways. So it's just kind of like feeling victimized in this really particular way, and really way that a lot of people can't relate to, and then it's hard. Then you get invalidated because people don't understand it.
Yeah, I remember one of the more validating people actually was Rufus Sewell. When I had that month-long flirtation with my celebrity crush, I remember talking to him about this, and it was like we didn't even have to talk about it very long, because he's like, "Oh yeah, I know. That's the struggle between ego and God. You wish that you were this person that you always thought you were, that other people expect you to be, but you're not. It's just that's that struggle." Because he's far more famous than I was by light years. It's just like it was just such an instantaneous of course.
Yeah.
So that was
nice.
Nice.
It's interesting that our two different experiences of anger, and it's interesting how, again, the key role of validation, right? Especially, I guess that we're now moving into talking about like if you are experiencing anger towards other people, or if you're trying to help someone else regulate, like a loved one regulate their emotion, again, validation is number one, right?
Yeah.
And it's tricky. Actually, validation with anger is very tricky, because depending on how you validate it, it could actually build. Like anger could actually get really more intense, which could be effective, could be not. So especially if it's self-righteous anger. And if, for example, if you were to say, yeah, Kibby, he's a jerk and you should, be super angry, in fact, blah, 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 then I might actually just build up to the point where I act on it ineffectively. So it's
that
really...
is how I feel, Kibby.
I know. But you actually have validated it really well, which is, this is where the separation between validating the emotion and validating the expression is key, right? It's like validating, like, yes, you have a reason to be angry. Yes, you were taken advantage of. Yes, you were hurt, right? Even that can be super validating and really did make me feel better in the moment. If you were to say, yes, and now you should do X, Y, Z and take them down, right? Exactly. Like if you endorse a certain way of acting on it, So I think the validation is always key, even to yourself. If you feel anger and feel ashamed about it, like think about, okay, what is this anger? Why am I angry? What am I protecting myself from? What's unfair? Like how does this actually make sense? The anger in this moment might not make sense, right? There's times where I felt like explosively angry and I was like, whoa, what's going on here? But yeah, it made sense if I looked at the several years that I might have been like shoving it down for a reason. And so it's like 4 years of anger and all in one moment. So validating it that way, and then with the thought of what is the outcome that I want from this situation, right? When I think about how I want to express my anger and act on it, what do I want to get out of the situation? What would be my ideal outcome? Mm-hmm. So many people, when they feel angry in the moment, they're like, I just want that person to hear it. I just want to tell them how it is and tell them my peace of mind and blah, 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 right?
Yeah.
But then if you really like slow down and think about it, that might not be the ultimate goal. Yeah, if your ultimate goal is to have that person hear a bunch of attacks and a bunch of horrible things about themselves, fine, go for it. More often than not, though, people have another goal of like, yeah, but I want them to actually stop doing the thing that's hurting me. I actually want them to know how much I'm in pain and how much they're hurting me. I want them to stop. Or I want them to actually say X, Y, Z and validate whatever. So there's actually like, usually people have this other idea of what they want. Mm-hmm. And then that is a nice clue as to like, okay, how can I actually express that in an effective way? Is screaming expletives at them the way to go about that? Or is actually like saying, hey, you really hurt me with that comment. You really hurt me with this. You know, you didn't follow up on the responsibilities that you said you would take on. You know, and then go into a dear man, which we actually covered in another, right? Like to assert yourself effectively, like, please do this, please stop doing this, right? To actually like get what you want out of the situation. That would be like effective acting on the anger.
Yeah. There's always this sort of sense of slowing down, and it can be especially frustrating with anger because anger is mobilizing and anger is quick. And so to tell your anger, like, okay, I'll listen to you if you slow down, or I'll slow down and listen to you, and then because anger wants you to get up and slash the tires. And you have to be like, no, that's going to beget more anger and hurt down the road. Like, but I'll sit here, I'll listen to it, I'll figure it out. Like, what do I really want? And then act rationally. That can be frustrating, but I guess that's the best way to go.
Yeah, I'm laughing to myself right now because just this past week, I paused. I was like, okay, I'm really, really angry right now. What do I want to do? Okay. I want to do this and that. I don't want him to feel this way. So slow down, maybe wait a day. It's always good to pause and wait, to let the anger diffuse so that you still understand and feel the anger, but you don't act on it right away.
Yeah. Of
course I didn't do that. Of course 2 seconds later I wrote a bunch of texts that like, so I definitely lean into the ineffective. But, I mean, actually it might not have been ineffective because my ultimate goal now is to express all that I'm feeling and really, really feel it and not hold it back. And it's like 4 years a little bit too late. Yeah, so I wish I could have gone back in time and done something a little bit better, more upfront. But here we are, and hey, we're not perfect, but I get it.
What would you say to the person who has exploded and now they're dealing with the fallout? Like, what would you say to do?
To myself, yeah.
to yourself, or like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is what I'm doing to myself. Validating why I was angry, talking to my friends, talking to you, and really getting validation about why I was angry. So I don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, I had no reason to be angry, I'm being crazy, all the different things. To like, no, it makes sense. This was unfair, and I'm angry about it. Mm-hmm. And then if I acted or expressed the anger in ways I don't feel good about or was untrue, or then I would apologize for it or repair, right? There's some guilt that makes sense, right? If it's in a way that's not effective, not what you meant, apologize for that expression. Be like, I'm sorry I said this. I really meant this. In this case, I think all the things I said were, I think they were pretty accurate because I thought a lot about it, I did put a lot of thought, and in a lot of therapy, it goes into it. But, like, you apologize for what you need to apologize for, but don't apologize for the whole anger in general. And then, like, what I'm trying to do long term is, like, what did I learn from that? Okay, what was I protecting myself from feeling like I was overextending myself? All right, so the next relationship I'm in, next situation, I have to learn to really, really feel my limits, really feel my boundaries, and remember that if I sacrifice it to just keep the peace in the moment, it's going to bite me in the ass later on. So stick to those limits. If someone doesn't fulfill what they say they're going to fulfill, then I'm going to have to say like a polite goodbye, or not overcompensate by making up for what they are not doing, which is what I usually do, and just kind of like dropping the rope and saying, okay, people can rise up to what they say they're gonna do. So that's gonna be my long-term work, is figuring out where I was hurt, where I felt it was unfair, and in the future try to prevent those situations.
Yeah. Okay, so if you're a friend of someone with a lot of anger, validation, important. One thing is like, so I was actually just in the situation with my sister like 5 minutes before this phone call. And, you know, she kind of goes into this mode when she's angry where she's like, you know, like let's say she's angry at my mom. It'll be like, mom's terrible, everything's bad. You know, it's very black and white kind of, you know. Do you validate that? Like, because I always find myself in an awkward situation because on the one hand, sometimes I think of people in that angry moment as like eating an ice cream sundae, where it's like you just gotta let them eat, like finish the sundae. They just need to be angry, get it out, vent, whatever, and it's not going to be helpful if you're like, you know, taking the sprinkles away, or like, you know, challenging what they're saying, being like, no, it's not true, she's not bad. But on the other hand, it's like I don't know if it's going to make it worse to validate, you know, whoever is completely terrible.
Yeah. Yeah, and knowing a little bit more about anger, remembering, that people get quick, they get defensive, and so the real key is to try to validate the primary emotion. So if you know that person's scared, if you know that person's sad or feels hurt, you know, if you can do it well, and if you know them well, just, you know, with love and with compassion, like, I understand you must be feeling super hurt right now, super scared. I get why you're pissed, and but then also, of course, setting limits, right? I think with all anger, as we talking about slowing down for yourself or for someone else, like taking a breather, taking a break for 20 minutes, letting that anger diffuse, right? So it's not like hot until it cools down enough that you could still have that conversation. So validating primary emotion, validating the anger, but in order to block like ineffective expression, like, you know, diffuse, take a moment, breathe, don't respond, don't go back and forth and try to get that person to see your point of view in that moment, because it's not going to work. So just kind of like take a step back from that, but in a loving way, not, you know, like, all right, let's talk about this in a few hours, you know? Yeah. We just take a breather and love you. We'll talk about this in a minute.
Okay. And if you're in a partnership, I suppose we've talked about a lot of this already, with making sure to not engage at the height of the moment, getting down to a 70% anger, like a... Yeah. I mean, the couples therapy is great for this kind of thing too, but right, if you're feeling angry from like a 0 to 100 scale, you can collaboratively talk about this with your partner, but not to engage in the argument when both parties or even one party is like a 70 or above. Like trying to only like 69 and below can you actually start to talk and have that conversation, because it's really hard to stay collaborative in that moment when you're like in full defense mode, right? Yeah. So taking a breather, Yeah, I think just to direct people, like if you're in a couple in a romantic relationship with someone with this as an issue, we talked a lot about that in the attachment styles episode. You want to check that out?
And another thing is that if you're having a difficult time, you know, this is another anger management tips from DBT. It's like, if you feel like your anger is like the 70 and above, right? And taking time to like take a walk. I always like to use my body, so I like to take a walk or exercise or something like that to try to dispel some of that energy. But you could also use some strategies to bring it down a little bit, like perspective taking, like really taking a moment to be like, okay, what is their side? What would they say to what I'm thinking, right? Because when we're angry, we just think about, and then you did this and you did that and you did, but like putting yourself in their shoes, what would they think? What would they feel? What would they say back?
Yeah.
Just to like slow down and break up that like one way kind of thinking. Then also a DBT skill of willing hands is a good one. Basically, it takes a principle of like using your body to not just express anger, but the opposite, like collaboration, welcoming, receptivity, and warmth. So it's literally turning your palms upward, like, and have a nice gentle smile. So it's using your body to kind of manifest the opposite of anger, right? So it's just like smiling, warmth, like open arms, palms up, gentle smile on your face, deep breaths. So that will just help regulate the anger down from the 70 to 100 spike into a place that you may be able to communicate better.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I would say about perspective taking, because I think perspective taking is so important. Like, I advocate for it as much as possible. But just being careful if you are the kind of self-sacrificing person to not completely adopt that perspective while sacrificing your own. Not to basically be like, okay, well, there's some validity there, and so there's no validity to my stance. Like,
right.
Trying to kind of hold them both up.
Yeah. That's what I would do. I kind of flip to like my perspective or his perspective. I would, instead of balancing both at the same time.
Yeah. I guess the last note is that like the way anger is received, there's a huge cultural component here. And I think that can lead to a lot of invalidation and misunderstanding. There are some cultures that are much more accepting of anger. I think in white culture, particularly, perhaps in Asian culture as well, suppression of anger is valued and pushed, maybe. And so, we might be invalidating them towards another culture that's much more kind of freely expresses anger and might know how to handle it or receive it better than we do.
Yeah, I think that's important to think about when your loved one is coming from another culture, right? I think that a lot of couples might have that that tension between one coming from a culture that is way more expressive and more accepting of expression of anger, and the other one is like, oh, we don't fight in my family. Yeah. And finding a way to validate that anger is real and anger has an important function, and it really tells people when you've hit a limit or when a boundary's been crossed. So that's really useful information, but finding a common language between you and your loved one of how to express in a way that feels effective for both of you, that you get, okay, whoops, I've really crossed a line with that person, but not in a way where it really, destroys the relationship.
Yeah. Okay, well, resources, Kibby?
Yeah, there's a couple good books that I'm turning to these days. High Conflict Couple, A Dialectical Behavior Therapy Guide to Finding Peace, Intimacy, and Validation by Alan Frazzetti. It's always good when we use this for a lot of using kind of DBT skills, emotion regulation skills in relationships. And because it's focused on high conflict couple, it's a lot of really good tips for when couples have this pattern of like exploding and getting to fights and things like that. So
yeah,
that's
I also think they're good for friends and families. That book is good for friends and families. Yeah.
It's very accessible. It has some nice explanation of the theory, but also like here's an exercise that you guys can do together. So. And also, I really love Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist monk who writes a lot of really beautiful books on all these different kind of psychological concepts and life quandaries, but from the mindfulness perspective. So a good one from him is Anger, Wisdom for Cooling the Flames. It's a really great book on how to think about anger and approach anger through this kind of a Buddhist mindfulness framework. So we'll put both of those book references on the website, so check them out.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Kibby, and I hope you all found this helpful. We will see you next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.